Hello guys, this is your friend Shinobi Nexus 2.0 and we are back in new fanfic. What if Naruto hunted the man behind the Nine Tails Part 3? The first thing Kakashi noticed upon waking up was that he wasn't alone. Kneeling next to him was a fairly attractive woman with long blue hair. He immediately recognized her as Tsunami, the daughter of Tazuna. Upon arriving at their client's home, they were greeted by her, and she offered him a room to sleep in before he subsequently passed out due to exhaustion. "Are you feeling any better, sir?" Tsunami asked with a pleasant smile. Tazuna, who was lounging on the other side of the room, expressed his pleasure at Kakashi's apparent recovery before continuing to drink his morning tea. Kakashi only had the energy to nod before the door to the bedroom opened, and his students poured in. Sakura was far and away the most excited to see that he was awake. Meanwhile, Naruto, and Sayuri in particular, were much more subdued. Seeing them made him feel somewhat guilty. He was their teacher, and yesterday they had to rescue him and then carry his exhausted body to safety. "Kakashi-sensei, you're finally awake," Sakura exclaimed. Since he was first put in charge of Team 7, Kakashi was almost immediately floored by just how kind-hearted and amiable Sakura was. Every day, no matter the time or the weather, she was the first to greet him when he arrived and the first to say goodbye when the day ended. Comparatively speaking, Naruto and Sayuri were much more complex and challenging to deal with in their own unique ways. Reading the room, Tsunami decided to give the team some space. "I'll let you all discuss your shinobi business," she said before leaving Kakashi's bedside and sitting down next to Tazuna. "Let me know if any of you need anything." Team 7 was grateful for the gesture, and Kakashi and Sakura offered words of appreciation before they were finally able to have a talk. Naruto, Sakura, and Sayuri sat at Kakashi's side, with expectant looks gracing their faces. They clearly expected some instruction or briefing, and Kakashi was happy to oblige. However, he wasn't confident that they would like what he was going to say. After encountering the two hunter nin at the climax of their battle with Zabuza, something had been eating at Kakashi. First, the way the hunter nin conducted themselves wasn't consistent with the typical protocols. For one, they were oddly talkative, whereas most in their profession were quite wary and suspicious of outsiders. Second, they took Zabuza's body away rather than destroying it on the spot. "I hate to start this morning off on a bad note, but I think I may have some bad news," Kakashi explained, causing his students to lean forward in anticipation. "It's very likely that Zabuza is still alive." All were shocked at the revelation, but none more so than Sakura. The girl's face instantly shifted from amicable curiosity to pure dread. Unlike Naruto and Sayuri, Sakura wasn't nearly as polished or skilled in combat-ready skills. She was much more adept at using her mind, but yesterday she had been so rattled that even that proved too difficult for her. No doubt, she had been relieved at the possibility that the worst was behind them. "What do you mean, sensei? We saw him die. You said it yourself. He had no pulse." Sakura questioned. Kakashi shook his head. "Even then, I found the hunter nin's choice of weapon to be a bit odd," he explained. "Senbon have little in the way of killing power, but they're renowned for their precision and accuracy. A skilled enough user could easily target the pressure points in the neck to initiate a death-like state." "But why would they do that?" Naruto asked with a furrowed brow. "Are you thinking that they might be on Zabuza's side?" That was Kakashi's theory. "I think they were watching our battle from afar the entire time. The moment they realized Zabuza was defeated and at risk of being killed, they intervened in a way that would allow their ally to survive," he elaborated. "I wasn't able to notice these inconsistencies in the heat of the moment, which is surely what they were counting on." Sayuri frowned. So Zabuza was alive and apparently had two dangerous allies as well. Admittedly, the revelation that more battles would come was rather appealing. She was ashamed to admit that her initial response to Zabuza was pathetic. She was quite literally rendered a quivering mess like some frightened child. It was only after working with Naruto that she gathered the strength to fight back. Recalling fighting side by side with Naruto caused Sayuri to subtly gauge her teammates' reaction to the news. He didn't seem all that scared or worried. Still, a slight tension in his jaw indicated that he was taking the situation very seriously. Zabuza was powerful enough in his own right, and now it seemed like he wouldn't be the only enemy to contend with when they crossed paths. Frankly, despite your impressive performances yesterday, I stand by what I said when I told you all that you aren't prepared for this mission, Kakashi said. At that point, I would have classified our mission as B rank, but now I'd say it is easily A rank. For a moment, Sayuri was worried that Kakashi was thinking about calling it quits here and now. However, based on Sakura's reaction, it was clear that she was thinking the same thing as well. She looked as though she was eager to hear that they would be heading back to the village as soon as possible. Sayuri understood where she was coming from, but this inherent fear prevented her from completely respecting Sakura as a peer. A true shinobi shouldn't fear danger. However, since we're essentially already in enemy territory, and I'm not in traveling condition, returning to the village doesn't seem like a viable option, Kakashi continued, immediately satisfying Sayuri and taking the wind out of Sakura's sails. With that being said, I've decided that for the next week, I'm going to train you all so that you'll be prepared as possible for the trials to come. Sakura seemed skeptical. Do you really think that we'll be able to get ready in only a week? She inquired. And what if we don't even have time to prepare? Zabuza could attack again tomorrow for all we know. Kakashi shook his head. Thankfully, time is on our side, he said. Zabuza will likely be out of commission for about a week after having his pressure points targeted in such a manner. That would give Kakashi some much-needed time to recover as well. Unfortunately, he'd exhausted nearly all of his chakra, which wasn't something one quickly came back from without ample rest. Nevertheless, with Kakashi at his best, and the rest of them allowed to improve and learn from the previous battle, Sayuri was confident they would come out on top. It doesn't matter what you do. You're just wasting your time, a voice suddenly interrupted from the doorway. Team 7 turned toward the mysterious figure and saw a small boy, no older than 8. He had spiky black hair, dark-colored eyes, a green jumpsuit, a yellow shirt, and a blue and white bucket hat. He had a petulant, sullen expression on his face, and Sayuri immediately felt that he would be irritating. Inari. Tazuna called out with glee. Where have you been, my boy? Inari, as he was apparently called, jogged over to Tazuna and gave him a hug. He greeted him and called him Grandpa, which confirmed that this must have been the grandson Tazuna had told them about. Tsunami entered the room once more, her hands on her hips as she frowned. Inari, that was very rude. Those shinobi helped your grandpa and brought him here safely. It's okay, Tazuna waved off with a grin. I'm rude to them too. At that moment, everyone on Team 7 mentally sighed. Truer words had never been spoken. Despite his mother's lecture, Inari continued to glare at Team 7 with disdain. Sayuri couldn't figure out his deal and, in the end, decided that she didn't care. She didn't make a habit of concerning herself too much with annoying people, unless she didn't have a choice, like in the case of Naruto. Mom, don't you see that these people are going to die? Gato and his men will return and wipe them all out. Naruto scoffed before glancing at the rest of Team 7. Well, so much for the hero's welcome, huh? The word seemed to trigger a response from within Inari, who glared even harder and fixed his gaze solely on Naruto. There's no such thing as heroes, idiot, Inari insulted. And even if there was, they wouldn't wear orange like some clown. Naruto's brow twitched, and Sakura quickly placed a hand on his shoulder before he did anything rash. Sayuri, on the other hand, could, at the very least, appreciate someone who was able to get under Naruto's skin, if only just a little bit. Even still, that didn't mean she was a big fan of the cheeky brat, either. Inari then turned to the other members of Team 7, "If you want to stay alive, you should go back to wherever you came from," he said before turning to leave the room. Tazuna stood from his seated position. "Inari, wait. Where are you going?" "To look out at the ocean," Inari replied as he opened the sliding doors. "I wanna be alone." Once the doors were closed behind Inari, Tazuna turned to Team 7 and offered an awkward apology on his grandson's behalf. Seeing no reason to hang back any longer, Naruto, Sayuri, and Sakura went to prepare their things so they could train. Tsunami helped Kakashi to his feet and gave him a crutch to support his weight. Sayuri then looked over her shoulder to see Naruto gathering his supplies like a grumpy child. "Nothing wrong with Orange," Naruto mumbled under his breath with a scowl as he packed his bag. Sayuri smirked. Once Kakashi had recovered a bit more, Team 7 traveled to a nearby forest to train. It was an environment that was more familiar to them and one they were far more comfortable with. The trees loomed relatively high but weren't quite as colossal as those in the Land of Fire. It was rumored that the first Hokage himself used his powers to nurture the forests and cause them to be the largest in all of the 5 great nations. "Alright, similarly to our first week together, I've prepared individual training regimens for each of you," Kakashi explained once they found a sizable clearing. He was more grateful than ever to have been given the crutch by Tsunami, otherwise, he wouldn't be able to stand. Kakashi then retrieved 2 scrolls from his pouch and tossed one to Naruto and one to Sakura. "Naruto, in your scroll is the body flicker jutsu. I think it'll suit your style nicely," he explained before turning to Sakura. "And Sakura, your scroll contains the basics of medical ninjutsu. I'm not all that well versed in it myself, but until I can find you a proper tutor, you'll have to settle for that. But with your excellent chakra control and studio useness, I'm sure you'll excel at it." As usual, Sakura appeared excited to be learning something new. Her academic nature really lent to her being suited for memorizing and processing abstract concepts. However, it was the physical applications that she lacked. Medical ninjutsu was the perfect avenue for her to thrive. It was essentially just intelligence and medical know-how coupled with refined chakra control. She already had 2 out of the 3 requirements, and now she just needed to do what she did best, study. "With this, can I finally?" Sakura thought to herself while sneaking a sideward glance at her teammates. Naruto and Sayuri were so far ahead of Sakura in terms of skill that it wasn't even funny. If the bell test had made her feel insecure, the battle with the Chunin and Zabuza left her feeling useless. Whether it be a test against a Jonin, a chance encounter with 2 enemy Chunin, or a struggle to the death with an A- rank criminal, Naruto and Sayuri always rose to the occasion. And yet, Sakura could only ever watch from the sidelines. Kakashi turned to Naruto and Sakura and instructed them to find a place to practice their new techniques. He would come to check on their progress shortly. However, engrossed in her thoughts as she was, Sakura didn't hear a word. Instead, she was fixated on the new possibilities. With this scroll, she could finally find her place on Team 7. It was only at that moment that Sakura realized she didn't have specific goals for the future. She didn't know what kind of jutsu she wanted to learn or what fighting style she would use. For the most part, she had been figuring things out as she went along. The fact that she was average at just about everything jutsu related meant that she never really focused all that hard on one particular type of jutsu. That would change, starting now. "You coming, Sakura?" Naruto asked, dragging her back to reality. Sakura's cheeks flushed at the unexpected attention. "Why yeah," she replied before following Naruto out of the clearing. That left only Sayuri, whose arms were crossed almost impatiently as she awaited Kakashi's instruction. Not that she wasn't grateful, but during their last week of training, all she learned was how to run up a tree and blow smoke out of her mouth. Okay, maybe she was exaggerating. That jutsu came in handy, after all, but this time she was expecting something more noteworthy. Sayuri recalled that during Naruto's training with Kakashi, he learned a powerful clone jutsu. In her mind, it would only be fair if she was given comparable advancement during her week of training. If there was even a slight gap between her and Naruto, she wanted to match and eventually surpass it. Otherwise, he'd never shut up about it. But first, there was something she had been waiting to ask her sensei. Kakashi seemed amused by her restlessness. My, someone's eager to get started, he remarked. How do you have a Sharingan? Sayuri interjected before Kakashi could continue whatever irritating thing he was probably about to say. In an instant, Kakashi's demeanor changed. The mischievous twinkle in his eye seemed to vanish and was replaced with a weariness that exposed a wounded heart. Whatever his explanation was, it was apparently not something he enjoyed discussing. Well, if anyone is entitled to know, I suppose it's you, Kakashi conceded with a shrug. During the Third War, a comrade gave away his life to save mine. In his final moments, he entrusted me with this Sharingan. With every day that goes by, I try to be worthy of his sacrifice. Sayuri's lips twitched as she couldn't help but feel slightly guilty. When she learned that Kakashi had a Sharingan, she immediately reached the worst possible conclusion. Her clan had always been mindful that there were outsiders who coveted their power. The incident with the attempted theft of the Byakugan from the Hyuga clan only exacerbated these worries. With that said, her sensei had done nothing up to this point to deserve her doubt. And regardless, Kakashi demonstrated a skill with the Sharingan that even members of her clan would have no choice but to respect. In fact, she'd never seen someone utilize the Sharingan in actual combat, and it excited her to continue to advance her own. The thought of copying someone's jutsu and using it against them was incredibly appealing. Kakashi then placed his hand on the left side of his headband, the side that concealed his Sharingan. Don't feel bad about being curious either. When I first gained this eye, your clan was at a bit of a loss for what to do. But, in the end, they must have approved, otherwise, I wouldn't have it anymore. In the end, Sayuri decided that if her father apparently had no issue with it, then it wasn't her place to try and make a fuss. Interestingly, Kakashi said that he had been given the eye during the Third Great Shinobi War, which meant that he'd had it longer than she'd been alive. That made expressing outrage on her part seem even more ridiculous. With that being said, I've learned a lot during my time with this eye and have managed to make quite a name for myself, Kakashi continued. I might not be an Uchiha, but seeing as we don't have many other options available at the moment, I suppose you'll have to settle for me. Now, activate your Sharingan, and let's get to work. Sayuri couldn't help but smirk. Straight to business. She liked that. Sakura studied her scroll with brow-furling intensity. She'd always demonstrated an admirable dedication to whatever she put her mind to, especially when it came to academics. It made sense then that Kakashi would choose medical ninjutsu as her area of focus. So far, she was making steady progress. Apparently, chakra had destructive and healing properties, which depended entirely on the user's application. The natural healing process could be accelerated by pouring one's chakra into a wound. However, the speed and effectiveness of the healing were dependent on the user's skill and experience, which could be honed through rigorous study and training. The first stage of the training was to find a dead leaf and restore its color and vibrance. This process was pioneered in the Hidden Leaf Village, go figure, by someone referred to in the text as the Slug Princess. The procedure was especially effective on vegetation due to the abundance of chakra that saturated nature, making it the perfect beginner's training tool. Confident she had a basic grasp of the concept, Sakura surveyed her surroundings before identifying a nearby dead leaf on the ground. Picking it up, she ran her fingers against the withered surface, noting that it lacked the waxy texture of a living leaf. Still, she found a different kind of beauty in it that she found rather pleasing. There was a reason that autumn was considered by many to be the most beautiful season of all. Putting those thoughts to the side, Sakura gripped the stem of the dead leaf and began carefully funneling her chakra into it. This was slightly different from a regular chakra control exercise. It required that the user harness the more spiritual aspect of chakra, which required intense mental concentration. For this reason, medical ninjutsu was primarily utilized by those with a knack for academics and critical thinking. Initially, Sakura noticed no changes. She felt chakra hum at her fingertips, not unlike when she focused chakra into the soles of her feet during the tree climbing exercise. After a few moments with no progress, she halted the chakra flow and let out a steady breath. Sweat began to trickle down her brow, belaying the sheer exhaustion caused by an activity that would seem like nothing to an outside observer. It's the same feeling I get when I cram the night before an exam, Sakura groaned in her head. That was the best way she could describe it. The focus required for the jutsu was immense, to the point where if her thoughts shifted elsewhere for even a split second, all of her progress would be undone. Sakura breathed deeply through her nose, pinched the stem with a gentle grip, and closed her eyes. She began by emptying her mind, focusing on images of life and rebirth. She imagined the leaf slowly regaining its color and began to practically feel the familiar waxy sensation against her fingers. Finally, her eyes opened, and she saw both her fingers and the leaf become encased in an intoxicating green aura. Just as Sakura saw the faint signs of life returning to the leaf, she heard a loud thud reverberate behind her. Her concentration was immediately broken, and she swiveled with displeasure to confront whoever was responsible. However, her anger immediately faded when she saw Naruto faceplanted onto the ground, apparently having crashed with enough force to make a comical indentation of his body in the dirt. Sakura would have laughed if not for the fact that she had a heart, though she would be lying if she said she wasn't fighting the urge. With a groan, Naruto lifted his head out of the ground, spitting dirt and muttering obscenities. It reminded Sakura of the bell test when she'd rescued him from his earthly prison using a good old explosive tag. Seeing Naruto in a vulnerable light gave her the feeling that she was taking a glimpse at his true self, a hot-headed kid who was often too wise for his own good. She found that person far more relatable than the boy she'd known at the academy. I hate this damn jutsu, Naruto growled, still not noticing that he was no longer alone. I swear I'm doing everything right. Apparently not, Sakura blurted out before she even thought about what she was saying. Naruto's eyes darted to her like a dog who had just been caught standing on the dinner table. There was a moment of silent awkwardness that was beginning to become a theme of their interactions together. It seemed as though Sakura had a knack for crossing paths with Naruto at his worst moments. When she thought about it, she noted that he was lucky she was his teammate rather than someone like Ino. If that were the case, the whole village would hear about his blunders. Oh, hey, Naruto replied, breaking the silence and rising back to his feet. Sakura inclined her head. So what brought you over here with such force? She asked, trying her best not to be insensitive. Naruto scoffed and walked up to her before sitting at her side. He looked out at the small stream that ran through the woods near Tazuna's house. Just the stupid jutsu that Kakashi-sensei gave me. It's more complicated than I thought. I'm able to do the body flicker just fine. It's the landing that I'm having trouble with, he explained before glancing over at her. And you, what's with the leaf? Sakura's eyes brightened at the opportunity to explain something she had just learned. In her experience, the best way to truly master a subject was to explain it to a person who had no idea what it was and to do so in a way that made sense. She would also be lying if she said there wasn't a hint of satisfaction brought forth by the fact that she knew something that the number one student in her class didn't. So how do you make your chakra do that, anyway? Naruto asked after she gave him the basic rundown. Not knowing the best way to explain, Sakura shrugged. It's like chakra control but even harder, she elaborated. I can't explain since I haven't even managed to do it yet. With a slight nod, Naruto's attention shifted to the leaf in Sakura's hand. After a brief moment of thought, he held his hand almost expectantly. It took Sakura a moment to realize that he was asking her to hand the leaf over, and seeing no harm in letting him have a look at it, she complied with no fuss. Pinching the stem between his finger, Naruto held the leaf right up to his eye and squinted inquisitively. He muttered. So, you're supposed to bring it back to life. Well, technically. Before she could finish, Naruto stood to his feet with extreme concentration on his face. He held the leaf out at arm's reach and closed his eyes. His grip on the stem tightened to the point that she noticed his arm begin to tremble. Sakura quickly realized that he was trying to complete the exercise with the bit of information she had revealed to him. Sakura could only watch in awe as visible chakra began manifesting around Naruto's outstretched hand. The leaf began to quiver as if standing up against a strong wind. Sakura began to wonder if Naruto was succeeding where she had failed. If so, that would mean that everything she had heard about him up to this point was true. He really was a genius. The type of shinobi that came around only once every. Her shameless admiration was then interrupted when the leaf exploded in an extraordinary fashion, a clear sign that Naruto had used too much chakra. Silence reigned, and Sakura could swear that she heard a bird cawing almost mockingly in the distance. A bead of sweat then proceeded to drip down the side of Naruto's head, and due to the angle of the lightning, a shadow hid his face from view. His head then swiveled slowly to face her, and Sakura nearly lurched back at the sheer intensity of his presence. Did that look as embarrassing as it felt? Naruto asked tonelessly. Sakura blinked only once before admitting, kind of, she said, her voice gentle and pitying. Then there was silence once more. I'll go get you another leaf. Gato's hideout was an odd-looking structure built around a large tree. It was supported by steel cables extending into the ground and surrounding trees. It included suspension bridges connected to other, smaller structures usually manned by Gato's security. Zabuza was still recuperating after his fight with Kakashi. He appeared far too vulnerable for his liking, being confined to a bed like some feeble old man. At his bedside was the ever-loyal Haku, tending to him as always. He often pondered Haku's incredible devotion to him and simply credited it to the kid's rough background. Only someone with a crappy life would be grateful to be saddled with a rogue shinobi, after all. Their privacy was then interrupted when the door opened, revealing Gato and his lackeys Zori and Waraji, two rogue samurai who were nothing special as far as Zabuza was concerned. They were amateurs compared to the samurai from the Land of Iron, who knew how to use chakra in their fighting style. Still, the two thugs were tough enough to kill ordinary people, which was all Gato needed from them. Well, would you look at this? Gato mocked with disdain. I almost didn't believe it when I heard that the great demon of the mist was beaten in battle. Gato looked about how most would expect, with a small stature that he clearly attempted to compensate for with his extravagant lifestyle. He had shaggy brown hair, a pencil mustache and sported a pair of small, circular black glasses, along with a suit and tie. Despite the ridicule from someone he viewed as utterly inferior to him, Zabuza showed no frustration or anger. In fact, it was actually Haku who took the most offense, rising out of his chair and glaring over his shoulder. The gesture caused Zori and Waraji to place their hands on the hilts of their swords, an escalation that was immediately noticed by Haku. Noticing the budding tension, Gato waved off his subordinates, much to their surprise. Relax, he said before walking past them to Zabuza's bedside. He approached the demon of the mist with unwarranted confidence that bordered on stupidity. He went as far as to reach out to Zabuza's face. Don't be shy, Zabuza. Are you really going to let your little boy servant stand up for you on your behalf? At the last moment, Haku's hand snapped out and gripped Gato's wrist in a vice while Zabuza continued to scowl at the ceiling. It was clear that Gato wasn't used to someone making such a blatant threat to his safety if the look of shock plastered over his face was anything to go by. "Don't touch Master Zabuza with your filthy hands," Haku warned before snapping Gato's wrist with little effort. Gato screeched out with pain, prompting Zori and Waraji to finally unsheath their swords to protect their boss. The sound of steel sliding against wood must have alerted Haku, who turned on a dime and quickly identified the threat. Before the two samurai could blink, Haku was standing between them, having disarmed them, holding their own blades against their throats. "I wouldn't do that," Haku growled, his eyes widening with fury. Thankfully, rather than killing Zori and Waraji where they stood, Haku threw their weapons onto the ground and returned to Zabuza's bedside. Having been both injured and dismissed in such a short time, Gato was incensed. However, seeing Haku's inhuman display was enough for him to realize that there weren't enough mercenaries in his hideout to take him out. Gripping his now broken wrist, Gato offered one final warning before leaving, "And next time, you better not fail, otherwise, those shinobi from the leaf will be the least of your troubles." Once he was sure that they were gone, Haku sat back down. Then, he noticed the kunai that Zabuza was concealing under his blanket. "That was unnecessary, Haku," Zabuza lectured. Haku smiled. He was always aware that his master was deadly and prepared no matter the circumstances. "I know," Haku admitted. "But it's too early to take down Gato right now. If we attract too much attention, the hunter Nin will be back on our trail again. We have to be cautious for now." Zabuza's scowl deepened. "Yeah." After a few more moments of silence, the door opened once more. Initially, Haku thought it was Gato again, but he was relieved when he saw that it was Mangetsu, who had apparently returned from his special mission. Zabuza also noticed his return and tried to sit up in his bed, only to be forced back down by Haku. "What did you find out?" Zabuza growled, a bit irritated at being babied by his own subordinate. Mangetsu strolled over to the windowsill before sitting on the edge. "Kakashi Hatake seems to be out of commission, at least for the time being," he explained. "If you'd permitted me to kill him, I could have ended our problems right there." Not long after returning to Gato's base, Zabuza had ordered Mangetsu to obtain information on their new foe. Of course, Kakashi Hatake was the primary focus, as he was the only real threat. However, Zabuza gave specific orders for Mangetsu not to engage with the Hidden Leaf team and to prioritize not being spotted. "Don't be why, brat. Hatake could have stumps for legs and still be too much for you," Zabuza warned. "He's known for using lightning-style jutsu, so I don't want you going anywhere near him." With a slight frown, Mangetsu relented with a nod. Being a member of the Hazuka clan, he could liquefy any part of his body at will. This made him virtually invulnerable to conventional attacks. It also allowed him to pump water into his muscles to enhance his strength and slip through even the smallest cracks and crevices, which augmented his stealth and infiltration skills. However, despite the versatility of his liquid state, it rendered him very vulnerable to lightning, which would render him a puddle of jelly. However, both Haku and Mangetsu knew that he didn't want either of them to try to kill Kakashi Hatake because he wanted to avenge his defeat on his own. They would never admit being privy to that fact to his face, though. "What else did you find out?" Zabuza inquired impatiently. Mangetsu continued, "That girl is definitely an Uchiha," he said. "There's an emblem on her clothing that matches up exactly with what you described. And the boy, well, you aren't going to believe this." Haku frowned slightly at Mangetsu's hesitance to continue. Zabuza was far less subtle with his displeasure, propping himself up with his elbow and sending a harsh glare his subordinate's way. He had never been a patient man and didn't enjoy asking for things twice. "Out with it," Zabuza snapped. Mangetsu cleared his throat in apparent discomfort, When the Hidden Leaf team met the bridge builder's family, I heard the blonde kid introduced as Naruto Uzumaki. Zabuza's eyes widened, and Haku found himself feeling out of the loop. He had vague memories of the name Uzumaki but couldn't associate it with anything significant. Unlike Zabuza and Mangetsu, Haku hadn't been raised in the Hidden Mist village. Therefore, he didn't receive the same formal education, leaving him less informed about historical events. Is that a problem? Haku asked. Not particularly. It's just surprising, is all, Mangetsu explained. The Uzumaki clan are supposed to be all gone. We helped exterminate them around 30 years ago. For a brief moment, Haku felt shame at wearing the Hidden Mist headband. It wasn't the first time that he'd ever felt that way. Still, Zabuza considered the village his home, so Haku chose to represent it with pride despite his personal feelings. As far as he was concerned, the Hidden Mist was a village with a terrible history, an unstable hellhole with a penchant for civil war and genocide. It was for this reason that Zabuza's goal was so important. To think there would still be an Uzumaki skulking around these days, Zabuza pondered. From what I've heard, they used to be best buddies with the Hidden Leaf village, so it isn't surprising that some survivors may have escaped there. Still, that brat doesn't look like they were supposed to have looked. Haku hesitated before chiming in. Is there a reason that they had to all be killed? He muttered quietly, knowing that Zabuza would interpret his curiosity regarding the subject as a sign of weakness. Predictably, Zabuza merely scowled in his direction before staring back at the ceiling. Seeing as his master had just removed himself from the conversation, Haku shifted his attention to Mangetsu, who he was confident would be willing to explain things to him. They were dangerous masters of Fuan J0 Utsu and were close allies with the Hidden Leaf village, as Master Zabuza said, Mangetsu clarified. We made a pact with the Hidden Cloud village to destroy them and their village, the Hidden Whirlpool. It was all to keep the balance of power from shifting too far in favor of the Hidden Leaf. Haku lowered his head. I see. Then that boy was just like him. Under better circumstances, Haku was sure they would have much to discuss. Two young boys whose clans had been hunted like animals out of paranoia and fear. He just hoped that the upcoming battle wouldn't be the end of both their families. Sayuri's eyes shifted from crimson red back to their ordinary onyx color. She'd been training with Kakashi all day yesterday and had spent the following morning doing drills to perfect her Sharingan's abilities. One such exercise was counting the number of leaves on a branch while moving at high speed, one of the few drills that could be practiced without a partner. She noticed that her Sharingan was becoming more precise, for lack of a better word. It made reading hand seals even easier and allowed her to anticipate her opponent's moves with more reliability. Sparring with Kakashi felt so different than it did during the bell test, and she was beginning to realize just how powerful of a tool her eyes actually were. After taking a short break from her training, Sayuri reactivated her Sharingan and leapt into the forest. As she passed one tree, she observed one branch and counted all the leaves in a split second before leaving it behind her. She did so with several other trees before noticing something odd. On one of the trees, she saw a strange imprint, and when she scanned the forest even further, she saw many other indentations strewn about. Sayuri landed at the center of a small clearing, where much of the damage appeared to be concentrated. It looked like someone had just fought a battle with craters all over. Her senses then alerted her to a presence. She turned around to see Naruto perched on one of the branches above her, looking smug. What brings you to my neck of the woods? Naruto inquired with a grin, probably thinking his corny joke was funny. With her trademark scowl, Sayuri replied, Did you just get into a fight or something? It looks like a war zone here. For a brief moment, Naruto appeared to freeze up before he visibly relaxed again. Just training, he assured before jumping down to land in front of her. Speaking of which, you've gotten better since we graduated. You noticed my presence pretty easily. I don't make the same mistake twice, Sayuri replied, remembering how Naruto had managed to touch the back of her neck without her noticing before teams were announced. Now, I'm always expecting you to be lurking around somewhere. Sayuri's response seemed to amuse Naruto if his expression was anything to go by. At this point, the sheer animosity she had met during their one and only spar was at the back of her mind. She was never one for talking about her feelings or hashing things out through words, and she imagined that Naruto was the same. Of course, he'd made it clear over the past few days that there were no lingering feelings of disdain or anger, but she'd be lying if she said she still wasn't curious as to why he was so pissed in the first place. I see. So that must mean you're always thinking about me, huh? Naruto asked with a wink, interpreting her previous statement in the most obnoxious way possible. Sayuri opened her mouth to refute the accusation but was waved off. I'm just kidding, relax. I feel like I've told you this a million times already, but you need to lighten up a little. I'd be much more relaxed if I wasn't on a team with you, Sayuri countered. Naruto smiled. Ouch. There was a brief silence between the two, with neither really knowing what to say. Naruto then appeared to look something close to nervous, which was odd. He looked everywhere except for Sayuri, having apparently grown fascinated with the surrounding forest. At that moment, Sayuri opted to observe him silently. Both he and his clothing were scuffed from hard training, but he hardly seemed short on breath. His physical condition was actually really impressive. Sayuri couldn't remember a time when she saw him looking fatigued. Just as she began to analyze his face, Naruto turned to face her direction. She quickly shifted her gaze, hoping he hadn't noticed the staring. Though he was now looking directly at her, Naruto seemed to have trouble meeting Sayuri's gaze. This wasn't where I planned on doing this, but we're both here, and we're alone, so what the hell, he said with a shrug. Sayuri began to feel uneasy. She was reminded of the dialogue from those corny romance dramas that her mother used to watch. Your Sharingan, Naruto continued, and Sayuri instantly realized what this conversation would be about. I'm sorry I reacted the way I did. I didn't expect you to have eyes like that, ya know. At this point, Sayuri was relieved that Naruto wasn't going to confess his undying love for her or something. You're fine, she replied. Unsurprisingly, she wasn't used to these types of conversations and hoped that the simple assurance on her part would suffice. Naruto smiled again, and Sayuri noted that it looked a tad more genuine than usual. He gave a simple two-finger salute before vanishing in a flash of speed. Sayuri's eyes widened at the feat, and she realized that meant that Naruto must have at least gotten a grasp of the jutsu that Kakashi gave him. The thought made her smirk, all the more reason for her to continue to improve. Sayuri then heard a dull thud and a groan in the distance, and her smirk nearly evolved into a slight chuckle. Seemed like Naruto still had some kinks to work out with his new jutsu. Well, at least now she knew why craters were everywhere in the forest. That evening, at Chizuna's house, Sakura watched in morbid fascination as Sayuri and Naruto ate more food than anyone she'd ever seen, barring maybe Choji. Naruto ate like a ravenous beast, switching from taking a bit out of his fish, chewing on some bread, and drinking soup straight out of the bowl. Sayuri wasn't much different, yet she found a way to look dignified despite it all. Chizuna laughed uproariously. This is fantastic. It's been too long since we've had so many guests around our table. Tsunami, who was washing dishes, nodded with a smile. She was clearly flattered by the intensity with which Sayuri and Naruto inhaled her cooking. You know, maybe you two should slow down a bit. Sakura recommended with a nervous chuckle. Couldn't you possibly get sick? Sayuri shrugged off the suggestion. I have to replenish my energy so I can train more, she stated simply. And I have to eat more than her, Naruto added after swallowing a mouthful of food. Otherwise, she might start to think she's catching up. Funny enough, Sayuri didn't take the bait as she would in the past and immediately finished the last of her soup with a single gulp while not breaking eye contact with Naruto. When she finished, she made a satisfied, almost taunting, "ah" sound and smirked challengingly. Naruto scowled and then immediately asked for seconds, followed quickly by Sayuri. My, at this rate, you munchkins will be taller than me by the week's end," Kakashi joked with his signature eye smile. Everyone at the table wondered how he managed to eat all his food without anyone seeing him take his mask off. The remainder of the dinner went off without a fuss, and Tsunami offered everyone a cup of tea. It was delicious and the perfect way to cap off a long day and heavy meal. Sakura finished her tea and took her cup to the sink to clean it. Tsunami protested, volunteering to do it herself, but Sakura insisted on helping out. While she did, she looked to her left and noticed a strange picture on the wall. It was of Tazuna, Tsunami, and Inari. Two things were particularly strange about it. 1. Inari looked happy. Glancing over her shoulder, Sakura eyed the sullen boy closely and wondered if he even remembered how to smile. And 2. The top corner appeared to have been ripped off, obscuring the fourth figure in the photo, who seemed to be a man. "Excuse me, but I couldn't help but notice that this picture is torn," Sakura spoke out, perhaps unadvisedly. "Is there some reason for that? It looks like there was someone else in the picture, but they were torn out." Her inquiry was initially met with an awkward silence, and Team 7 immediately picked up on the fact that something wasn't right. Inari slumped further into his chair, his bucket hat now shadowing his eyes. Tazuna eyed the young boy warily, and Tsunami paused what she was doing before eventually continuing. "It's my husband," Tsunami explained despondently. Tazuna leaned forward with a furrowed brow. "They used to call him a hero in this land." Without a word, Inari silently pushed out of his chair and left the table. Up to this point, Team 7 had already gotten the vibe that he was a bit of a brat, but this felt different than an ordinary tantrum. "Inari, where are you going?" Tsunami called out with concern. She followed her son up the stairs, but not before turning back towards her father with a glare. "Father, you can't talk about him in front of Inari. You know that." The silence that followed the exchange was even more awkward than the first. Tazuna appeared more dejected than upset, and it was clear that this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Understandably, Sakura felt a bit guilty. "I'm sorry I said anything," she said. Still, Tazuna assured her that it was okay. With that, she felt safe to inquire further. "What happened to Inari?" Tazuna continued to stare down into his cup of tea. "He wasn't the boy's actual father," he revealed. "He was a fisherman from another country that was seeking opportunity. It was only later that we were lucky enough to have him join our family. He and Inari were very close. Back in those days, Inari was such a happy kid," Tazuna continued with a rueful smile. "He was then, however, overtaken by tears. But all that ended. He never laughs or smiles anymore, not since Kaiza died." "Tell us what happened," Kakashi requested calmly. Tazuna removed his glasses and wiped away his tears. "It was Kaiza who taught this island what courage was," he explained. "About 3 years ago, Inari was being bullied, and his dog was thrown into the sea. The boy had always been terrified of the water, but eventually, he jumped in to rescue it. He would have drowned if Kaiza hadn't saved him." Sakura was overtaken by sorrow. Children could be so cruel to each other. It made her remember the days she was taunted for having a broad forehead. It was almost fitting that our hero would turn out to be a simple fisherman. "It showed the people that anyone could be a hero," Tazuna said. After that day, Inari and Kaiza became inseparable. Since the boy had never known his real father, you can only imagine what that bond meant to him. He looked up to him and followed in his footsteps, like a real father and son. The corners of Naruto's lips twitched downward for a brief moment, a reaction only noticed by the ever-perceptive Sayuri. Tazuna continued, but it was when the town needed him that he became something more, he said. The floodgates were opened by a storm, and the water rose rapidly. The locals called Kaiza for aid since the lower district was at risk of being swept away. Against all the odds, Kaiza swam against the heavy currents and secured a rope on the gates so they could be pulled closed. And from that day on, Kaiza was considered a hero in this land. There was a creeping dread around the table, as even though Team 7 didn't know how the story would end, they were confident that it wasn't a happy conclusion. But it wasn't long until Gato showed up and took over, Tazuna said, spitting the shipping tycoon's name with venom. He terrorized the village, and only Kaiza stood up to him. For his trouble, Gato had him captured and beaten. Kaiza's arms were cut off in a mockery of his motto to protect what you love with both arms, and he was publicly executed soon after. And Inari saw the whole thing. Sakura placed a hand over her mouth in horror, Kakashi's lone eye narrowed in disgust, Sayuri's frown looked deeper than usual, and Naruto glared at the photo on the wall. Such a terrible way to die, and for that to happen to such a fantastic person. And what made it worse was that Inari had to bear witness to the death of his hero. Since then, Inari has changed. So did Tsunami, and all of our people, Tazuna concluded. We lost our will. And Inari doesn't believe in heroes anymore. Sayuri knew better than anyone how far people's cruelty could go, and one could argue that she had already seen the worst of what the world had to offer. And yet, even she found herself despising this Gato bastard. Only Kakashi seemed unfazed by the story, but it was still evident that he was less than thrilled with what he'd heard. If there was any doubt that they needed to be here in this country, it had vanished entirely. Without warning, Naruto pushed out of his seat, earning looks from everyone around the table. He rotated his shoulders as if to stretch his sore muscles and made way for the front door. Seeing as it was so late at night, everyone was justifiably confused. Kakashi asked where he was going but received no answer. Before leaving the house, Naruto looked over his shoulder. Sayuri's eyes widened when she saw Naruto's expression as serious as she had ever seen it before. Everyone watched in silence as he left. Sayuri observed the empty chair at the table and frowned. Naruto hadn't returned since leaving to train alone the previous evening, and everyone was starting to get worried. Well, everyone besides Kakashi, who appeared just as laid back as ever. Particularly, Tsunami found it difficult to conceal her anxiety, which Sayuri attributed to the fact that she was the only mother in the room. Are you sure he's safe by himself, sir? Tsunami asked Kakashi, reiterating her earlier worries. Kakashi waved her off. Naruto might be young, but he's also a full-fledged shinobi. He can handle himself just fine. For the most part, Sayuri was pretty unconvinced. She recalled how skilled those fake hunter nin appeared following the fight with Zabuza and was unsure if Naruto would be able to handle himself against them in the event of an ambush. Shinobi never fought fair, so if Naruto had spent the night alone in the woods, he could have easily been killed in his sleep. Having never been a fan of uncertainty, Sayuri pushed out of her chair and put on her sandals. She received an odd look from Sakura, who was still working on finishing her breakfast. On the other hand, Kakashi continued reading from his crummy book as if nothing had changed. Though Sayuri was confident that he was paying close attention, Kakashi had a talent for appearing disinterested even when he wasn't. Where are you going, Sayuri? Sakura asked, concerned at the possibility of both of her teammates winding up lost in hostile territory. We just sat down for breakfast. Sayuri briefly glanced over her should before opening the door. I'm going for a walk, she explained, tersely, before leaving without another word. Sakura frowned before her expression quickly shifted into awe when she saw Sayuri's bowl was already completely empty. Where does she fit all that food anyway? Sakura mentally groaned. Naruto slept in the center of a clearing, with morning dew dampening his hair and clothes. Nevertheless, He managed to sleep through the wetness, likely due to extreme fatigue. He also didn't notice the figure observing him from a distance. Haku watched Naruto as he slept, surprised that he'd even encountered the boy. He'd left Gato's compound early in the morning to search for herbs, making sure to dress in a manner that would make him unrecognizable. He wore his long hair loosely, with a pink, sleeveless kimono with pale red edges and decorated with small plum-colored swirls. Around his waist was a simple white obi tied in a bow, and he wore a pair of light brown sandals with dark straps. Haku had regularly employed this strategy since his youth, using his feminine features to disguise himself as a girl. Nobody ever suspected the pretty girl. While pondering Naruto's unique features, he wondered what the strange markings on the boy's face represented. Were they genetic, symbolic, or merely a stylistic preference? Either way, Haku imagined that it made it pretty easy to recognize him in a crowd, that, along with his striking blonde hair. He also had a strange aura about him that Haku couldn't quite identify. Maybe it was his chakra, or perhaps something else. Regardless, Haku recognized him as a threat. Zabuza had only said that Kakashi was off limits, which meant that Haku could put a dent in their enemy's fighting power by killing Naruto there and now. His expression darkened, and he took slow, purposeful steps toward his vulnerable foe. When Haku finally stood at Naruto's side, he crouched down and hovered his hand over the boy's throat. It would perhaps be the easiest kill he'd ever make and would no doubt please his master. The Uzumaki clan is supposed to be all gone. We helped exterminate them around 30 years ago. Haku recalled Mangetsu's words. He might have been looking at someone who was the last of a once great clan. It prompted Haku to think about his own family, the Yuki. The Yuki bloodline was passed down to him through his mother, who concealed her identity and married an unassuming peasant. However, as a child, Haku began to manifest strange abilities. When his father found out, he murdered his mother and tried to kill him. "Wake up," Haku called out, opting to shake Naruto's shoulder instead of wringing his neck. "You'll get sick if you sleep outside." Naruto's eyes snapped open, and he appeared shocked to be face to face with a beautiful young woman. Haku found his reaction amusing. It was always funny to see how boys looked at him, almost as funny as when they discovered that he wasn't a girl. Naruto then sat up and rubbed the sleep out of his eyes. "What are you doing out here, lady?" Naruto asked, apparently not viewing Haku as a threat, meaning that his attire had worked. Haku smiled pleasantly. "I'm collecting herbs," he explained. "Would you like to help? I can tell you what to look for." Initially, Naruto appeared skeptical before ultimately agreeing, "Sure, I guess." The next few minutes passed in silence as Haku pointed out the herbs he was looking for, and the two boys made quick progress. At first, Naruto had difficulty finding the correct herbs, and Haku had to discard quite a few. But, eventually, Naruto got the hang of it, and Haku found his morning chore being completed twice as fast as he'd initially predicted it would. "You're a shinobi, right?" Haku suddenly asked while they were both crouched over the grass. "I can tell from your headband." Naruto nodded without looking away from his task. "Yeah. That's why I'm out here. I'm training." A soft chuckle escaped from Haku's lips. "It looked to me like you were sleeping." "Well, yeah, but only because I trained so hard," Naruto replied, looking a bit sheepish. "I honestly didn't plan on sleeping at all." So, the boy had spent the night in the woods training. Haku couldn't help but be reminded of Mangetsu's younger brother, Suigetsu, who used to travel with them. He'd often sneak away with Zabuza's executioner's blade and practice while everyone was sleeping. The following morning, Zabuza would always find out one way or another and tan Suigetsu's hide. Those were rare, pleasant times. "Are you training for anything in particular? Something dangerous?" Haku inquired, trying not to seem suspicious. Naruto shrugged. "Not really. I'm trying to become as strong as possible, ya know. Haku took a mental note that Naruto was at least skilled enough not to reveal sensitive information to a stranger. He'd half expected to hear all about the boy's extraordinary mission to save the local bridge builder from bloodthirsty assassins, but was almost pleased when that wasn't the case. It made Naruto seem less like a child and a real shinobi, making what would come later easier. You seem pretty strong already, Haku observed. Isn't that enough? Haku received a perplexed look for his trouble. What do you mean? Naruto asked as if he'd just heard the craziest thing ever. Of course, it's not enough. It's never enough. Haku held out his hands in a placating manner. I see. I'm not a shinobi, so I guess I find it difficult to understand, he explained before the two continued searching for herbs. After a while, Haku decided to ask another, much more important question. Why is becoming strong so important to you? For Haku, knowing one's purpose was the most crucial achievement a person could make. Without purpose, there was only misery. Haku knew this to be the case because he'd experienced life with and without a purpose and could recognize the suffering that came without a reason to live. However, not every purpose was created equal, at least not in Haku's eyes. You probably wouldn't understand, even if I tried to explain it to you, Naruto revealed, appearing reluctant to confide in Haku. No offense. For whatever reason, Haku had a strange desire to understand Naruto's motivations. Perhaps it was to see just how similar they were to each other. The parallels were pretty obvious, though, at the moment, only Haku was aware of them. Do you have someone precious to you in your life? Haku continued, not discouraged by Naruto's apprehension. When a person has something precious that they want to protect, they become truly strong. That's what I believe, at least. Naruto frowned before grabbing a handful of grass and tearing it out of the ground. Well, I don't have anything like that, he muttered. And that's exactly why I have to train so hard, if you must know. Haku's head tilted in confusion. So you're training to protect nothing? For a split second, Haku swore that he saw a red flash in Naruto's eyes. However, it was so brief that he chalked it up to a trick of the light. Regardless, it was clear that his question struck a nerve, which was what he had intended. The best way to get someone to open up was to get them emotional. I'm training to go after the person who took everything from me, Naruto snapped, causing Haku to recoil slightly. You want to know why I don't have anyone precious in my life? It's because someone killed them all before I even had the chance to know them. There was a thick silence in the clearing. Both Naruto and Haku stopped picking herbs, with the former of the two staring at his lap with clenched fists. Frankly, this was not how Haku had expected this conversation to go. Despite his circumstances, Naruto looked like an ordinary, well-adjusted kid, so it was shocking that he had such a difficult upbringing considering where he grew up. I'm sorry, Haku replied, simply and genuinely. Naruto's shoulders sagged, and he let out a weary sigh. It's fine. Don't worry about it, Naruto reassured after regaining his composure. He then ran his fingers through his hair. I shouldn't have even said anything anyway. Haku nodded empathetically. It's understandable to be angry, he said before looking Naruto in the eyes. But you should never let the pain of your past keep you from creating a better future for yourself. Because if you do, the person who took everything from you will win. Naruto watched in stunned silence as Haku grabbed his basket of herbs and rose to his feet. One day, you'll understand what I mean, Haku continued before leaving. And when you do, you'll learn what true strength is. Before leaving the clearing, Haku stopped in his tracks. Oh, and by the way, I'm a boy, he revealed before vanishing into the forest. Quote, comma, quote, quote, comma, quote, quote, comma, quote, a boy, hiding in the distance, Sayuri observed the entire interaction with wide eyes. Sayuri stared down at the grass in silence. While she hadn't intended to eavesdrop on Naruto's conversation, she'd heard everything. It didn't take a genius to connect all of the dots. First, Naruto, for the most part, was a loner just like her. Though, as for whether that was his choice or not, Sayuri wasn't really sure. Second, he dedicated himself to training to an almost hellacious and obsessive degree. Third, he concealed a dark past, the particulars of which served as his motivation. And finally, fourth, he had a single person to blame for his suffering and wanted revenge. When Sayuri thought about it that way, she and Naruto were basically the same person, and she didn't know whether that was a good thing. Ever since her clan's massacre, Sayuri had never considered the possibility of being able to relate to someone, especially not someone from her peer group. How many people in her graduating class could claim that everyone important in their life was eradicated by one guy? Well, the answer was two, apparently, her and Naruto. When Sayuri finally made her presence known and entered the clearing, Naruto was still picking his jaw off the ground after the revelation of the herbalist's gender. Admittedly, Sayuri was shocked too, and on any other day, it would have floored her as well. Yet, it was Naruto's confession that surprised her the most. "Oh, it's you," Naruto greeted once he noticed Sayuri's arrival. He then inexplicably scrutinized her with a furrowed brow. "Don't tell me that you're secretly a guy too." Sayuri's fist cracking Naruto's skull, and the subsequent squeal of pain echoed throughout the woods, causing the wildlife to scatter away in fear. Naruto grabbed the top of his head and crumpled to the ground like a wounded child. Naruto groaned in pain. "Yeah, the best way to prove that you're a girl is to punch someone in the head. Makes sense to me. Got it. Do you want me to hit you again?" Apparently deciding against irritating Sayuri further, Naruto kept quiet, opting to stand to his feet and rub his achy head. Sayuri knew he'd be fine. His head was hard as stone, and there probably wasn't a brain inside his skull either, so there was nothing to worry about. In fact, she would be willing to wager that was the case with all boys. It would at least explain why they were all such morons. "You shouldn't be out by yourself," Sayuri scolded with crossed arms. "What if one of Zabuza's allies found you sleeping out here?" Naruto placed his hands behind his head and grinned. "I'm glad to know that you were so worried about me," he said, causing Sayuri to scowl. "Did you come out here just to see how I was doing?" Sayuri averted her gaze, a bit embarrassed by the implication that she was concerned for his well-being. She came here to ensure he wasn't getting into trouble that she'd have to clean up later. It was also the only way to get Tsunami and the others to stop worrying. That's why Sayuri did it, not because she cared about Naruto or anything. "Did you make any progress, at least? Or are you still crashing all over the forest?" Sayuri asked, changing the subject. The smug look on Naruto's face and the lack of visible damage in the clearing told her everything she needed to know. As if on cue, Naruto vanished in a flash of speed much like he did the previous evening, but this time he landed deftly on one of the nearby tree branches instead of falling on his ass, as Sayuri partly expected he would. It would seem that he'd finally mastered the body flicker jutsu. "And you?" Naruto asked. "Anything worth presenting to Naruto-sensei?" Sayuri activated her Sharingan, revealing 2 Tomo in her right eye and 1 in her left. She'd managed to unlock another Tomo during her training with Kakashi. During their spars over the past few days, Sayuri could memorize Kakashi's movements and tendencies with fantastic precision, allowing her to anticipate his moves and better predict what he would do. She still wasn't able to win, but she got closer and closer each time. "The kind of progress I've made can only be shown one way," Sayuri explained. "If you're willing." Naruto grinned and jumped down from his place at the top of the tree, as if I'd ever say no to that. The duo stood face to face at the center of the clearing. Sayuri almost expected a strong gust of wind to rustle their clothes and hair like in the movies, but for the most part, everything was still. Naruto inspected Sayuri with an appraising stare, a gesture which she reciprocated. His clothing was scuffed up, as usual, and for the most part, he looked to be in good physical condition, again, as usual. Good. There wouldn't be any excuses from either side. Before the battle began, Naruto raised his right hand in front of his face and, in an incredible display, made the seal of confrontation. It was a part of traditional shinobi sparring and represented one half of a seal that might be used to activate a ninjutsu, and essentially meant, "I've come to face you in battle." It was a sign of respect between two worthy opponents. It made Sayuri think back to her academy days when the seals of confrontation and reconciliation were required. Still, nobody actually ever meant it when they did. Children had little time for respect. Sayuri was honestly surprised that Naruto even cared about the tradition in the first place. Frankly, he didn't seem like a very formal guy at all, and the last word that came to her mind when thinking about him was respectful. And yet, here he was, displaying regard for her skills as a shinobi, and perhaps as a person too. It was a stark contrast to the Y-jerk she'd met only recently. Without hesitation, Sayuri reciprocated the gesture and made the seal of confrontation as well. The two genin then burst toward each other in a blur of speed, beginning a series of matches that would go on well into the night. From the shade of the forest, Kakashi secretly observed the beginning of the spar before turning back to return to Tazuna's house. He'd just wanted to confirm that his students were safe, so he'd sent a clone to check on them. Now that they were together, he was confident enough to leave them to their own devices. Kakashi dispelled his shadow clone to the sounds of combat, and the transference of memories brought a smirk to the face of the original as he sat in Tazuna's house. It seemed that his two problem students were finally starting to get along. That evening, "Are you sure they're all right, sensei?" Sakura inquired, now more than just a little worried since she hadn't seen Sayuri since the morning and Naruto since the night before. Kakashi shrugged off her concerns. "I sent a clone to check on them. They're fine." Everyone was seated at the dinner table, aside from Naruto and Sayuri. As stubborn as they were, it was difficult to imagine they would miss a meal, hence Sakura's worry. Tsunami had prepared another excellent dinner, and Sakura was amazed at the delicious food she could cook with the limited ingredients that she had available. Naruto and Sayuri sure were missing out. "Yeah, but sensei, that was this morning. We should go check on them." The front door suddenly opened, revealing Sayuri and Naruto leaning on each other for support. They looked exhausted, but they seemed to have had a great time judging by the smiles on their faces. Sakura released a sigh of relief, and Kakashi merely nodded smugly, with an expression that practically dripped with, "I told you so," earning a comical glower from Sakura. Both Naruto and Sayuri were covered in dirt, soot, and bruises. It was clear to everyone that the only thing keeping them both on their feet was the fact that they were supporting each other's weight. If not for the fact that they looked so pleased with themselves, Sakura would have assumed that they were attacked or something. Kakashi knowingly smiled at his two students. "So, who won?" "Meet me," Naruto and Sayuri replied simultaneously before scowling at each other. Naruto and Sayuri looked as though they were about to argue. Yet before they could even get started, their legs wobbled out from under them, and they fell onto their butts. Tazuna openly laughed at the little mishap before immediately looking the other way and innocently whistling when he received glares from Naruto and Sayuri in return. "I think we'll just say it was a tie," Kakashi concluded. Tsunami giggled at the display. "You're just in time for dinner. Have a seat." Naruto and Sayuri quickly took their seats and started filling their plates without needing to be asked twice. In particular, Naruto was practically drooling from the mouth, which made sense since he hadn't eaten anything since the previous evening. Sakura once more watched in awe at the amount of food that her teammates could eat, especially for a girl like Sayuri. She'd definitely need to tell Ino about Sayuri's legendary metabolism when she returned to the village so someone could share in her jealousy. The dinner went on splendidly, with Tazuna telling grand, and likely exaggerated, stories that nevertheless managed to elicit smiles from everyone at the table, barring, of course, Sayuri and Inari. After a while, everyone finished their food, with Naruto and Sayuri clearing 4 whole plates before there was no longer any food to be had. Tsunami spent most of the meal watching Naruto and Sayuri guzzle her cooking with practical hearts in her eyes as she basked in the non-verbal appreciation. In a few more days, the bridge will finally be finished, Tazuna announced while Tsunami collected everyone's plates. I have you all to thank for that. For the first time since dinner started, Inari offered some form of a visible reaction, which came by way of a scoff. Naruto, who had been laying his head down on the table, squinted up at Inari and frowned. He knew the kid was about to say something that would piss him off, so he braced himself. You're all just wasting your time, Inari exclaimed, sounding exasperated. Tears began to stream down his face as he thought about the death of Kaiza. All heroes end up dying for nothing in the end. What's the point in dying to save people who are eventually going to die one day anyway? Your 4th Hokage guy is lucky that he went out thinking that his sacrifice actually mattered. Most people don't even get that chance. Sakura and Sayuri frowned at the blatant disrespect of their village's greatest hero. While the academy taught them that the 1st and 2nd Hokage created the village, and the 3rd helped maintain and transition it into a new era, the 4th Hokage was the most revered by the current generation of shinobi. Many were old enough to remember the Nine Tails attack, and since it was fresh in their minds, the 4th Hokage was the most beloved Hokage of all. Naruto looked down at Inari in rage-filled disgust. You're such a coward. You make me sick to my stomach, he growled before pushing out of his chair and going upstairs before he said anything that would get him into trouble. Inari was rendered a sobbing mess, though it was unclear whether it was because of Naruto's words or the sorrow that he still felt at the death of Kaiza. Kakashi watched Naruto leave with a knowing look, Sakura looked on in confusion, and Sayuri's mind began racing. Sayuri realized there was still more to Naruto than met the eye, even after what she'd already learned today. Inari sat at the edge of the dock outside with his knees pulled into his chest and a forlorn look on his face. Occasionally, he would look down at the framed picture that he was holding in his lap. It was the corner that had been torn off from the kitchen photo, the part with his father, Kaiza, on it. Just looking at the picture brought him to tears, so he could only look at it briefly before forcing himself to avert his gaze. Naruto's words had dealt Inari great pain, but not because he told him something that he didn't already know. Inari knew he was a coward and that his father would probably be disappointed in him were he still alive. But that was the point. His father wasn't alive and all because he was a hero. If his father had been a normal man, he'd still be alive today. A naive person like Naruto would never be able to understand that. Is it okay if I sit with you? A voice suddenly spoke up from behind Inari, thoroughly spooking him. He looked over his shoulder to see the leader of the shinobi team, Kakashi. Despite hearing the request, Inari said nothing and returned to looking at the ocean. Yet, he didn't say no, either. Kakashi sat down at his side, and for a while, nobody said anything. Inari had no intention of saying the first word, but he was almost sure that Kakashi would undoubtedly speak up at some point. What other reason would have come out here if not to talk? Kakashi also gazed at the water and did not look at Inari, even as he finally spoke. I'm sorry if Naruto hurt your feelings, he said. But it's not like you were in the right either. Inari's silence was tantamount to agreeance. Naruto lashed out at him only because he'd started it. Even Inari wasn't too stubborn to recognize that. Still, it didn't make the words sting any less. Your grandfather told us about what happened to your father, Kakashi revealed, which was no surprise to Inari. You may not be able to tell, but Naruto grew up without a father too, or any parents for that matter. They died not long after he was born, protecting the village from a great evil. They died as heroes. Inari looked down at his father's picture, and a familiar sensation washed over him as Kakashi spoke. Tales of heroes dying to protect what was precious to them, he'd heard them hundreds of times. Whether exaggerations from his grandfather or memories of his father, Inari knew heroes all too well. He also knew how their stories always ended. Naruto's never really been the type to reveal his true thoughts or feelings about things. But the anger he showed at dinner today was the realest emotion I've ever seen from him, Kakashi revealed. My guess would be that he sees himself in you, at least a version of himself that he'd rather forget. Sees himself in me, Inari remarked with blatant confusion. As far as he was concerned, he and Naruto couldn't be any more different. Naruto's been through a lot, and I'm sure there have been plenty of times when he gave up hope, just like you have, Kakashi continued. But for reasons that even I don't yet know, he's pushed on. And while I still think he has a lot of room to grow, I can't help but feel proud of him. There are people who've been through less that have gone down the wrong path. Inari could tell from the expression of Kakashi's lone eye that he was speaking from personal experience, but he didn't dare pry. So don't take his words too personally, okay? Kakashi requested. Inari sat in contemplative silence as Kakashi left. Sayuri awoke in the guest room to find that Naruto's futon was empty for the second night. She then noticed that one of the room's windows was cracked open, and it didn't take a genius to figure out where he was. So, making sure to keep quiet and not wake up Sakura or Kakashi, Sayuri tiptoed to the window and slowly pushed it open. Once she did, she climbed to the outside wall and closed the window, ensuring it was cracked open so she wouldn't get locked out. With an impressive show of acrobatics, Sayuri leapt off the wall and landed on the roof in complete silence. There, she found Naruto, sitting with his legs hanging off the edge while he looked up at the moon. Sayuri was sure he'd noticed her presence, but he didn't turn around or say anything. Do you have something against sleeping indoors? Sayuri muttered. Naruto shrugged. I guess I don't rely on comfort as much as you. A drop of sweat dripped down the side of Sayuri's head. Geez, everything was a competition with this guy. Opting not to respond, she sat down at his side and followed his line of sight. The moon was full and bright enough to illuminate all of the surrounding coastlines. It was stunning, and their vantage point was the perfect place to soak it all in. She'd have to give Naruto credit, he knew how to choose him. I never get any sleep when the moon's out like this, Naruto confessed. Don't ask why though, 'cause even I don't know. Sayuri inspected Naruto from the corner of her eye. Does it make you piss the bed or something? The not-so-subtle jab elicited a chuckle from Naruto, who looked at Sayuri with an expression that basically said, touché. He then looked back at the sky. You're getting better at banter, ya know. He said, in what was probably the closest thing to a compliment she would ever get from him. Still, there was a sense of pride to be felt by being complimented by the king of banter himself. Thanks to you, Sayuri replied before her brow furrowed. Why are you such a bastard anyway? Her inquiry brought a slight frown to Naruto's face. People have always acted weird around me, and I got sick of trying to be nice, he explained. For the longest time, I wondered why they looked at me the way they did, and not knowing was worse than the looks themselves. I guess I was trying to create a reason for the looks. Instead of not knowing, I could pretend that people didn't like me because of something I said or did. At least, that's how it was in the beginning. Naruto's explanation reminded Sayuri of her own experiences. Ever since her clan was murdered, everyone looked at her as if she were the walking dead. Even people that tried interacting with her did so as if they were walking on eggshells. Sayuri supposed that was another thing she and Naruto had in common. They were never given a chance to be normal. And then what happened? Sayuri asked, causing Naruto to tilt his head in confusion. You said that was how it was in the beginning, she clarified. So, what changed? For a moment, Naruto seemed to ponder her words, or, at the very least, considered how he would respond. I guess you could say that I finally found out why people treated me so differently, he said. But by that point, I was already stuck in my ways, and I'd given up on trying to make friends long before that. I had more important things to do, anyway. Sayuri had questions she wanted to ask but decided to hold her tongue in the end. The most obvious one was why people didn't like him in the first place. She also wondered if whatever it was had something to do with her clan. It would explain why he reacted poorly when he first saw her Sharingan. And with what she overheard him say in the clearing, she was beginning to wonder if someone with the same eyes as she was responsible for his suffering. A specific person came to mind. Her brother, Itachi Uchiha. The two sat in silence for what seemed like ages. Naruto looked as if he had gotten a lot off his chest, and Sayuri appeared as if she was struggling to find the courage to do the same. After accidentally hearing Naruto's confession in the forest, she almost felt she owed him something in return. Sayuri knew Naruto's secret and what motivated him, but he still didn't know anything about her. Do you know what happened to my clan? Sayuri suddenly asked, ending the silence between them. The knowing look on Naruto's face told her that he did. Someone from my clan staged an uprising. It was a bloodbath. Everyone died, except me and him. He's the one that I have to kill. Naruto stared at Sayuri intensely. Is he strong? Sayuri simply nodded, feeling there weren't enough words to explain how powerful her brother actually was. No doubt, he'd improved since they last met as well, which meant that even if she reached the same level of strength that he possessed on that night, there was no guarantee that she'd be able to defeat him. From what she could gather, Itachi was much stronger than Kakashi or Zabuza, and she was practically a spectator during their fight. Hell, Sayuri wasn't even sure if she would be able to beat those fake hunter nin. Well, I'm sure you'll find a way, stubborn as you are, Naruto said with a smirk. In a way, I pity what this guy has coming to him. You're bad enough as a teammate. I can't picture what you'd be like as an enemy. At this point, Sayuri couldn't help as a smile broke out over her face, the first of its type in quite a while. Naruto appeared almost proud at managing to make her smile, and even the embarrassment of the moment couldn't shake the look off of Sayuri's face. Sure, Naruto didn't know her brother or how insurmountable the prospect of defeating him was. Still, the fact that he was so confident that she'd managed to take him out was endearing. Naruto didn't even need to ask, he was just that confident in her tenacity. The bit about her being a bad teammate wasn't lost on her, but Sayuri chose to ignore it. With Naruto, she would take what she could get. The following morning, were you guys up late last night, or was I just imagining things? Sakura asked her team as they escorted Tazuna back to the bridge for another day of work. Naruto and Sayuri pretended they had no idea what she was talking about. Still, the slight glint in Kakashi's eye indicated that he was fully aware of what had happened. Of course, he knew. At this point, Sayuri wasn't surprised by anything when it came to Kakashi. It was like he always knew what they were doing, even when it looked like he didn't. While sleeping, he was probably more attentive than an average person was when they were awake, if he was actually even asleep at all. Naruto stopped in his tracks as his eyes caught something weird in the distance. The rest of Team 7 carried on without him, not noticing that he was trailing behind. As he continued to focus on the anomaly, his eyes widened. It was a dead boar that looked as though it had been sliced multiple times with a blade. No animal could have done that. Naruto, Sakura called out in the distance, having apparently noticed his absence. Are you coming? Realizing he had lagged behind, Naruto turned to see his teammates looking at him expectantly. In particular, Tazuna glanced at his watch and tapped his foot impatiently. Every second of the workday not spent on the bridge was a second wasted in his eyes. However, Kakashi looked at Naruto knowingly, apparently trusting his student's instincts in thinking that something was wrong. You guys go on without me, I need to check up on something back at the house, Naruto called out before vanishing in a body flicker. Seeing her teammate vanish right before her eyes made Sakura sigh. Geez, Naruto couldn't stay in one place for more than 10 minutes, could he? It was like he was begging to be struck down while all alone. That new jutsu he learned made it even more difficult, too, seeing as he could now disappear whenever he wanted. Such a pain. Kakashi shrugged the strange display off. Well, no need for us to wait. Naruto knows the way to the bridge, so he can meet us later, he said before leading them back down the path. Sayuri frowned as they continued on their trip. She hated being out of the loop and was also smart enough to know that Naruto wasn't going back to the house for some arbitrary reason. Still, after spending so much time sparring with him, she realized that it would take nothing short of Zabuza or one of the fake hunter nin to take him down, especially with his new body flicker jutsu. And they had Zabuza's target currently in their company, so if anyone was at risk of being attacked, it was them, not Naruto. When Team 7 and Tazuna finally arrived at the bridge, Sayuri sighed when she realized that her assessment had been correct. Bodies were strewn about the bridge, all workers who looked to have been incapacitated. However, the lack of blood indicated that they were still alive, which was later confirmed as someone twitching while unconscious. What the hell is going on? Tazuna shouted out in horror before swiveling his head around. Whoever did this could still be here. The area was then shrouded in a thick mist, essentially identifying who they were dealing with. Kakashi barked an order, and the remainder of Team 7 formed a protective formation around Tazuna, who gulped at the feeling of déjà vu. He would have to relive the same horror he'd experienced not even a week ago. Despite having come far in her training during the last week, Sakura felt her kunai trembling in her hands. Damn it. She wished that Naruto was here. Without him, they wouldn't have a chance. Sorry to keep you waiting, Kakashi, Zabuza's voice echoed through the mist, not indicating where he could be hiding, just like last time. And I see you brought your kids again. I hope you don't mind that I did too. They can have a play date together while you and I chat. Sound good? Kakashi hummed, apparently pondering the offer. I'm not sure, Zabuza. I don't know if I'm comfortable letting yours anywhere near mine. They might rub off on them in the wrong way. Zabuza's icy laugh echoed through the mist, sending shivers up Sakura and Tazuna's spines. I'm afraid that's the least of their worries, Kakashi. Suddenly, Team 7 found themselves surrounded by 10 clones of Zabuza, each brandishing the same massive blade. Kakashi glanced toward Sayuri and gave her a look, prompting her to smirk and tremble with excitement. Having been given the go-ahead by her leader, Sayuri channeled chakra through her legs to augment her speed and jumped into action. Before any of the clones could react, they each received fatal kunai slashes and vanished in puddles of water. Once that initial attack had failed, the enemy finally made themselves known. They first appeared as silhouettes but eventually revealed themselves to be Zabuza and the fake hunter Nin. The former looked fully recuperated and the latter still wearing their masks. Seeing them made Sayuri scowl in disdain. Who did they think they were fooling with these phony disguises? Well, looks like this one finally grew a spine, Zabuza remarked after giving Sayuri a look over before glancing at his two comrades. Doesn't that type of development just warm your hearts? It looks like you two may have a rival on your hands. Mangetsu scoffed behind his mask, and Haku merely nodded in agreement. It appears so, Haku admitted. She looks very good, but one of them seems to be missing. Oh, yeah, Zabuza recognized, not seeing the blonde brat from before anywhere around. That reminds me, Kakashi. Where do you find such interesting brats? To have an Uzumaki and an Uchiha on your team. The Hidden Leaf Village is starting to seem like the land of misfit toys. Sayuri and Sakura appeared shocked at the declaration, which indicated that Naruto's surname apparently had some kind of significance, at the very least was comparable to Sayuri's, who was born into a great clan. Kakashi brushed off the question. We may or may not have some interesting trinkets in our toy box, he retorted. But we don't like sharing, so don't even ask. Having had enough of the immature bickering, Sayuri took an aggressive step forward, holding a kunai in each hand with a reverse grip. As if accepting an invitation to dance, Haku took a step forward. The two teens eventually faced each other in the middle of the bridge, with their comrades watching them closely from each side. I admire your skills and bravery, Haku complimented. However, the look he received back from Sayuri indicated that he wouldn't be receiving one back. But you made a mistake earlier. Sayuri's eyes narrowed as the air grew suspiciously cold, far colder than it should ever get at this time of year. She looked down and noticed that the puddles created from Zabuza's destroyed water clones began to chill and frost over. Despite the somewhat intimidating display, Sayuri grinned at the challenge. This time, it would be Kakashi and the others watching her. Tsunami was cleaning dishes, absent-mindedly humming a tune to keep herself entertained. She was in relatively high spirits lately, and it was all thanks to the arrival of the Hidden Leaf Shinobi and the eventual completion of the bridge looming on the horizon. Sure, it likely wouldn't bring an end to all of their problems all at once, but it was a start. On another note, she'd had private conversations with the team leader, Kakashi. He said he would inform the Hokage about the Land of Waves situation and see if he could help. Her pleasant daydreaming was interrupted when the front door were obliterated, seemingly cut to pieces. Tsunami dropped a plate onto the floor, and it shattered as she covered her mouth to halt her scream. At the door were two rogues that she recognized very well. Their names were Zori and Waraji, Gato's personal bodyguards. She remembered them from that day. Hey lady, you're Tazuna's daughter, right? The more level-headed of the two, Zori, asked. Let's skip the pleasantries and get on with this. Gato wants a hostage, and you seem like the perfect choice to me. From the other side of the wall, Inari heard the commotion and peeked his head around the corner. He saw his mother cowering on the ground, with two terrifying swordsmen looming over her. He had already gathered that this was terrible news, but when he heard Gato's name, all bets were off. This was beyond bad. Mom, he shouted on instinct before covering his mouth after realizing that he'd just given away his position. The two samurai casually looked over their shoulders to see a trembling, tearful boy. Waraji grimaced in disgust, finding the kid's fear pathetic. Hey, should we take this one too? Tsunami's blood ran cold at the mere suggestion. Thankfully, Zori shook his head. Nah, Gato said he only wants one hostage, he said before making Tsunami's heart stop. Just kill him or something. That sounded like music to Waraji's ears, and the sound of his blade sliding against his sheath sounded like death to Tsunami and Inari. He took a foreboding step toward the young boy but stopped when the kid's mother shrieked like a madwoman. If you hurt my son, I'll kill myself, and you won't have a hostage. Tsunami screamed. I'll bite my tongue, I swear. Apparently, finding the threat funny, Zori and Waraji smirked. People like them would never understand a mother's desire to protect their child. They'd sell their mothers away in a heartbeat if it meant saving their own skins. In their eyes, that was how the real world worked, and people like this were just living in fantasy land. Zori sighed before waving his partner off. Fine, fine. Let's not make this any more complicated than it needs to be. He then rolled his eyes when Waraji looked disappointed. You already drew blood today. And besides, Gato will be pissed if this crazy bitch offs herself, and we come back without a hostage. Do you want to be the one to explain what happened? The prospect of pissing off their billionaire boss wasn't all that appealing, so even the blood-lusted Waraji conceded. Guess it's your lucky day, kid, he remarked before sheathing his sword. Inari only watched in horrified silence as the two men took out some rope and tied his mother's wrists together. Unable to watch any more, Inari concealed himself behind the wall once more as Gato's men took his mother, who knows where. He mumbled apologies under his breath, but there was nothing else that he could do. He was weak, and Gato was strong. You're such a coward. You make me sick to my stomach. Naruto's been through a lot, and I'm sure there have been plenty of times when he gave up hope, just like you have. But for reasons that even I don't yet know, he's pushed on. Mr. Kakashi, live your life so that you'll have no regrets. No matter how hard, no matter how sad, if something is precious to you, protect it with both arms. If you do that, even if you die, the proof that you were a man will remain forever. Father. Inari looked down at his arms to see they were no longer trembling. He wiped away his tears and stood to his feet, a look of determination now spread across his face as his thoughts shifted to his mother and grandfather. His father may be gone, but they were still here, and he would be damned if he let anything happen to them. Upon strengthening his resolve, Inari ran into the kitchen and retrieved a knife from a drawer. It wasn't nearly as large as a sword, but it was better than charging out barehanded. Having everything he needed, he burst through the front door to see his mother being escorted down the docks. He heard the two samurai taunting his mother as they roughly pulled on the ropes, causing her to nearly fall over. Hey, bastards! Inari shouted, causing Zori and Waraji to turn and look at him in bewilderment. Let my mom go, now. They spied the knife in his hand and couldn't help but chuckle. Grown men with better weapons than that had tried to stop them in the past, so what hope did this little brat actually think that he had? Inari! Tsunami shouted in terror before looking at Zori and Waraji place their hands on the hilts of their swords. If you hurt him, I swear. Before she could finish, a strike on the back of her neck rendered her a heap on the ground. How about you take a nap? Zori joked before rolling his shoulder. At this point, it's just self-defense on our part. With a shout of rage, Inari charged at the two men intending to kill, or at least do serious bodily harm. At that moment, he wasn't concerned with whether he lived or died. If he stayed inside and let his mother get taken, he'd spend the rest of his life disgusted with himself. A son's responsibility was to protect their mother when their father was no longer there. With his father in his thoughts, he pulled back the knife and prepared to thrust once he was within range. Not at all threatened, Zori and Waraji drew their weapons and prepared to cut down the cheeky brat there and now. However, before their blades could meet his flesh, an orange blur appeared between them, and they each received a kick to the temple. The force of the blows was enough to separate them from consciousness instantly, and Inari nearly tripped over his feet, trying to halt his advance. Naruto deftly landed between the two unconscious grunts, sure not to harm Tsunami. Then, he kneeled at her side and checked her pulse to be safe. Once he confirmed that she was still breathing, he removed the rope that was tied between her arms and tossed it at Inari's feet without a word. The young boy watched in awe as Naruto assisted his mother to her feet. Tie these goons up while I take your mom inside, Naruto ordered before carefully carrying the injured woman back to her home. Inari picked up the rope and looked down at his tormentors with thinly veiled amazement. Being from a coastal fishing village, he had a lot of experience tying knots, so he had no trouble restraining the two men, tying them with their wrists together, back to back. He felt an odd desire to kick them into the water below and watch them sink to their inevitable demise, but he shook the thought from his head. That wasn't something that his father would ever do. Once his task was finished, he returned to the house and saw that Naruto had placed his mother in her bed. He waited by her side with his arms crossed and appeared satisfied once he saw that Inari was back. Then, in a shocking display, he walked up to the young boy and pinched him on the cheek. It hurt quite a bit, and Inari grabbed his now reddened face and glared in bewilderment. What was that for? Inari yipped. Naruto shrugged. I just wanted to pinch you to make sure I wasn't dreaming. You're supposed to pinch yourself if you want to do that, dumbass. With a casual wave, Naruto ignored the criticism. Semantics, he argued before his expression grew serious. What the hell were you thinking charging at those guys like that, anyway? Inari grew solemn as well, the pain in his cheek becoming an immediate afterthought. Now that the adrenaline had faded, he wasn't sure what motivated his actions. Was it love? Anger? Both? He wasn't exactly sure, but one thing he was confident in was that he knew he'd done the right thing. Even if he'd died, he would have gone out like a man. Like a hero. Like his father. I decided to stop crying and actually do something, Inari declared, remembering what Kakashi had told him. That's what a real man does, right? Naruto appeared puzzled at the declaration before a smirk of understanding spread over his face. I suppose you're right, he conceded. Inari laughed, wiping away the dried tears that still remained on his face from earlier. I have to say, you proved me wrong, Naruto continued, causing Inari to pause. You definitely aren't a coward. Hearing those words from Naruto made Inari feel beyond honored. There was no doubt that his father was looking down at him with pride that he finally manned up and decided to protect what he loved with both arms. Inari wouldn't let Gato, or anyone for that matter, hurt him or his people ever again. An idiot, maybe, but not a coward, Naruto continued absent-mindedly, oblivious to Inari's thoughts. A tick mark appeared on Inari's forehead at the backhanded compliment, but he held his tongue in the end. This was just the kind of guy Naruto was, and right now, he was just grateful that his mother was safe and sound. Naruto looked at Tsunami before turning back to Inari. I have to head to the bridge now, he said. You think you can handle things here while I'm gone, big guy? Inari nodded his head resolutely. He didn't need protection anymore. From now on, he'd be the one doing the protecting. He watched Naruto leave with a casual wave before eventually disappearing in a flash of speed. Seeing such a feat made Inari realize what people were capable of if they put their minds to it. It actually gave him an idea. It was time for the people of this land to stand up for themselves. With that in mind, Inari went upstairs to retrieve his family's crossbow before heading into town. Sayuri and Haku clashed at the bridge's center, with Kunai crashing against Senbon as the two children attempted to exert strength over each other. Kakashi and Zabuza simply watched the display like proud parents, both confident that it would be their subordinate who came out on top. It was difficult to tell what Mangetsu was thinking, but Sakura's anxiety was apparent. Regardless, she rooted for her teammate all the same. You've got this, Sayuri. Show that jerk who's boss. Sakura mentally cheered. Meanwhile, Zabuza hummed in surprise, so she can keep up with Haku's speed. He thought to himself. After several more clashes of steel, Sayuri and Haku ended up in a deadlock. The kunai scraping against the Senbon created a shrill noise that made Tazuna cringe. We aren't here to kill you, Haku explained from behind his mask. We just want the bridge builder. You don't have to die here. Sayuri smirked in defiance, save it for someone that wants to listen. Haku shook his head, you don't understand. You won't be able to keep up for much longer, he revealed. Plus, you're already at a disadvantage. Despite Haku's helpful advice, Sayuri appeared unperturbed. After her training over the last week, her confidence was sky high. How's that? She asked. First, we're surrounded by water, Haku explained, alluding to the dispelled water clones. And second, I've blocked one of your hands, leaving you with only one for defense. Sayuri's eyes widened in shock when Haku began forming hand seals using only his left hand. One-handed seals? That wasn't supposed to be possible. Even Kakashi was shocked. He'd never seen anyone do anything close to that in all his years. Even the likes of the third Hokage never exhibited the ability to perform seals with only one hand, at least as far as Kakashi knew. Secret Jutsu. 1000 Needles of Death. Haku slammed his right foot onto the ground, and the water that surrounded the two youths then rose to form thousands of small needles that all seemed poised to pierce Sayuri's flesh. However, rather than getting discouraged or afraid, Sayuri calmed herself and assessed the situation. As they presently were, Haku was also vulnerable to being hit by the jutsu, which meant that he would need to dodge at the last minute to prevent his efforts from being suicidal. However, if he was fast enough to move away, Sayuri could also manage. Without warning, the needles descended onto Sayuri and Haku, with the latter relinquishing his position and backing away to avoid damage. Sayuri recalled her weeks of training since graduation and channeled her chakra into her feet and legs. It would take an incredible burst of speed to avoid a jutsu with such a massive attack radius, and there wasn't room for any mistakes. The needles crashed into the ground with tremendous force, initially making it impossible to tell whether they had landed or not. Those with experience on the battlefield, namely Kakashi, Zabuza, Mangetsu, and Haku, were keen enough to notice that it hadn't. They looked up to see that Sayuri was floating through the air above. Haku's eyes narrowed under his mask. This girl was good. Very good. While Sayuri remained in the air, she threw 3 shuriken, each resulting in Haku being pushed back to avoid damage. Before she could touch the ground, Sayuri disappeared again and appeared at Haku's back. Try to keep up, she taunted before Haku spun around to engage her again. Haku managed to parry an attack from Sayuri's right hand but was surprised when her opponent revealed another kunai in her left. Sayuri threw the weapon straight at Haku's head, who crouched down to avoid the damage. Unfortunately, this proved to be an ill-advised move, as Sayuri used the opportunity to kick Haku directly in the face, causing the older boy to skip down the bridge like a stone across a pond. With his student having won the initial exchange, Kakashi looked on with pride. When he'd first been assigned his team, Sayuri would have never been able to hang with an opponent of Haku's caliber. Now, here she was, landing meaningful blows against an elite missing nin. The growth was impressive, and Kakashi wondered how Naruto would fare in her situation. At this point, it was beginning to get difficult to discern who the strongest genin on his team was. Unlike Kakashi, Zabuza watched the entire fight in stunned silence. It wasn't possible. Nobody was faster than Haku, especially not some greenhorn from the Hidden Leaf Village. Mangetsu grit his sharpened teeth under his mask, not pleased at seeing his partner getting pushed around. He made to take a step forward but was stopped by Zabuza's outstretched arm. Remember your role in this operation, Zabuza muttered. Your job is to take out the bridge builder. They'd decided that Zabuza would fight with Kakashi Hatake while Haku took care of the genin, leaving Mangetsu to take out the target. The decision was made for a number of reasons. Mainly, Zabuza wasn't going to accept a strategy where he didn't get another crack at Kakashi, and Haku, despite attempting to conceal the fact, had no stomach for killing. Mangetsu, on the other hand, well, he was made from different stuff. Regardless, Mangetsu had seen enough. Haku, stop playing nice, he complained. Are you really going to let this kid land blows on you like that? As if following his instruction, Haku's chakra began to manifest around him, and the air grew even colder. He then formed a strange hand seal that Sayuri was unfamiliar with, indicating that this would be some kind of unique jutsu. I'm sorry it had to come to this, but you've given me no choice, Haku apologized, exhibiting a bizarre amount of empathy for his opponent. Structures made purely from ice began to manifest around Sayuri bizarrely, eventually forming into large mirrors. When the jutsu was complete, Sayuri was surrounded by a dome of these strange ice mirrors. There were gaps between each mirror that were large enough for her to escape, but she felt that doing so wouldn't be so simple. Secret jutsu, Haku muttered. Crystal ice mirrors. Haku then inexplicably walked directly into one of the mirrors before seemingly melding into it. Upon doing so, it looked like his image was simply reflecting off the crystalline structure. However, before long, the masked hunter Nin's visage was reflecting on all the other mirrors, making it impossible to tell where exactly he was. Without warning, a single Senbon needle grazed Sayuri's cheek, immediately drawing blood. This was followed by many others, either cutting her or piercing her flesh in non-vital areas. Unable to realize where any of the attacks came from, Sayuri covered her head with her hands and hunched over to protect herself. Unfortunately, all she could do now was cry out in pain. Realizing that the situation had gotten out of hand, Kakashi decided to take action. However, before he could reach his student, Zabuza appeared before him. How about you and I finish things, Kakashi? He asked before drawing his executioner's blade. Damn it, Kakashi thought before retrieving a kunai from his pouch. Just hold tight, Sayuri. I'll be there soon. Sakura watched the developing battle with unease. Both Kakashi and Sayuri were thoroughly occupied, leaving her to defend Tazuna. Not that she would complain, of course. She was no fool. She recognized that her current skill set was more suited to a support role. Most in her situation would pout or feel inadequate, but Sakura resolved to protect Tazuna as best she could. That was her responsibility. Only after her little self-pep talk did she remember that there were 3 enemies. Her head swiveled back to the other side of the bridge, and her blood ran cold when she realized that the other fake hunter Nin was nowhere to be seen. It didn't take a genius to figure out what would go down. He was going to try to kill Tazuna, and it was her responsibility to stop him. The question wasn't whether or not it would happen but whether she was capable enough to stop him. Deep breaths, Sakura, she thought to herself. What would Ino say if she found out you went running scared? Are you sure you're an actual shinobi? Sakura's eyes widened, and she swiveled on her feet to see the other hunter Nin behind her and Tazuna. One of his hands was resting on his right hip, which eventually drew Sakura's attention to the blade he had sheathed on his left. This was happening. This was totally happening. It would have been foolish of her to think that she would have made it through this entire mission without having to really pull her weight. Kids like you would have been weeded out pretty quickly in my village, Mangetsu continued. I mean no disrespect, but seriously. What are you even doing here? Unsure how to respond, Sakura merely repositioned herself in front of Tazuna and placed her kunai between herself and the enemy. He didn't seem to be taking her very seriously, which was good, all things considered. It was infinitely better than him killing her in one blow like she knew he could. Sakura saw how well his teammate managed against Sayuri, and there was no reason for her to think he was weaker. Mangetsu scratched the back of his head. Listen, this doesn't have to happen this way, he continued. But there's only one scenario where you come out of this alive, because if you try to get in my way even a little bit, I'm killing you first, amateur or not. So, get out of here and let me take care of business. That he thought she would accept such an offer made Sakura grit her teeth in frustration, but for reasons one wouldn't expect. She was upset because a part of her deep down inside was asking why she hadn't already accepted the offer and booked it. Her enemy was right, she had no business being here. But she couldn't just let him have his way. Sakura, Tazuna spoke up from behind her. You and your team have done your job in getting me this far. At this point in the construction, my workers can manage without me. There's no reason for you to have to die here too. Sakura looked back at her client in stunned silence. You're a sweet kid, you know that. So don't let this twerp's words get to you, Tazuna complimented with a small smile. But it wouldn't be right for a kid like you to die saving some old-timer. So, go on, help your teammate, who clearly needs you. Once more reminded of Sayuri's predicament, She looked over to the dome of ice mirrors to see her teammate trying, and for the most part failing, to avoid the mysterious masked boy's attacks. They came from all angles and at unpredictable intervals. Even if she was fast enough to dodge, it didn't matter. Only someone with eyes in the back of their head could defeat such a jutsu. Aside from the part about me being a twerp, the old man's right, Mangetsu reasoned. I'd gladly kill that blonde kid or the girl Haku's turning into a porcupine, but there's no thrill in killing someone who can't defend themselves, unless someone's paying you to do it, of course. Mangetsu added the last bit when he saw that Tazuna was about to say something snarky. Probably something along the lines of how an old bridge builder like him was as defenseless as it got. I don't. I won't. Sakura tried to formulate her words, but nothing really came out. Today, you helped Sayuri and Naruto both, and you were prepared to let them get the bells for themselves, even if it meant you would fail. That is the marking of a true shinobi, one I'd be honored to call my comrade. Sakura recalled Kakashi's words from the bell test, which brought her to tears not long ago. In the shinobi world, those who break the rules are trash, but those who abandon their comrades are worse than trash. Sakura then felt weightlessness take over her. It was easy to interpret Kakashi's words as blind idealism. Still, they hit differently now that she was actually in a real life or death situation. She looked at Tazuna, and a fire lit in her belly. The old drunk may not be a shinobi, but that didn't mean she didn't consider him a comrade. He was standing with her on the battlefield, pressing on to the same goal. Accepting her enemy's offer would make her worse than trash. Make it happen then, Sakura spoke up, with confidence in her tone, surprising Tazuna and Mangetsu. You said you'd kill me if I tried to get in the way, right? Well, this is me getting in the way. So do something about it. Tazuna looked down at the young girl in astonishment. Sakura. Despite the apparent showing of growth and strength, Mangetsu didn't seem impressed. You're in a rush to die. That's cute, he remarked. But let's see how tough you are when you actually see some of your blood. Mangetsu then lunged forward, all the while unsheathing his sword in an attempt to cleave Sakura in two from collarbone to waist. Despite how fast he was moving, Sakura could react based strictly on instinct. She parried his strike, but it only managed to divert the blow. Mangetsu's blade scored a shallow cut on her right side as he finished his strike, causing Sakura to wince in pain. Fighting through the agony, Sakura pulled another kunai from her pouch and threw it directly at Mangetsu's masked face, all the while keeping the kunai from earlier in her dominant hand for defense. Mangetsu dodged easily, almost lazily, before closing the distance much faster than before and attempting a horizontal cut. This time, his speed was too great for Sakura to react. Tazuna watched in horror as the girl in front of him was sliced clean in half at the waist, and Mangetsu merely looked down and shook his head. It was so unnecessary. Mangetsu's eyes widened when Sakura's body erupted in a puff of smoke, revealing a severed log in her place. The real Sakura quickly jumped into view, grabbing Tazuna and diving as far away as possible. Mangetsu watched the move in confusion before looking more closely at the log to see that it was covered in paper bombs. Oh, the explosion was fierce, enough to shake the foundations of the bridge they were fighting on. Thankfully, Tazuna's craftsmanship held firm, resulting in only surface-level damage that could easily be repaired within a couple of days. Nevertheless, enough explosives were used to kill a fully grown adult male a dozen times. You huff shinobi or huff crazy, Tazuna groaned from his back. The fall had been a bit painful, but he supposed it was better than being blown to pieces. I think I shit myself. Sakura appeared haggard as well, really? She asked with a look of disbelief. After all we've been through over the past week, now is the time you choose to crap your pants. Old people have sensitive bowels. Tazuna roared before narrowing his eyes pensively. Besides, I'm not even sure if I actually did or not. A deadpan expression passed over Sakura's face as Tazuna shifted his weight around to solve the mystery once and for all. Nope. False alarm. All good. Dear God, she was surrounded by such weirdos. The smoke from the blast eventually settled, and Sakura surveyed the bridge, hoping that her opponent would be no more. Imagine her surprise when he stood at the center of the blast radius, with no apparent damage whatsoever. The only difference was that his mask appeared to have been destroyed, revealing a teenage boy with shoulder-length white hair, purple eyes, and sharpened teeth. He wore a hidden mist headband, the same as Zabuza, and his expression could be best described as apathetic. Well done. You broke the bridge that you're supposed to be defending. And my mask too, I guess. Mangetsu congratulated with obvious sarcasm before looking at Tazuna specifically. I'm glad you didn't actually soil yourself, by the way. For the sake of your dignity. Sakura was stupefied. There was no way he should have been able to survive that explosion, unless he dodged it. But based on his current position, it appeared he hadn't moved. There wasn't even a single sign of injury on his entire body, either. Also, the fact that he seemed to have overheard their conversation meant that his eardrums weren't damaged by the explosion. What was this guy? Oh, you heard that? Tazuna asked, chuckling awkwardly and in embarrassment. I was just joking around for the kid. Mangetsu's expression belayed a lack of belief in Tazuna's flimsy excuse. Right, he continued before turning back to Sakura. Well, anyway. That was clever but not something I've never seen before. I'd ask if you have anything else hidden up your sleeve, but I'll go out on a limb and assume that you don't. Sakura could only grind her teeth in a fury. Her plan hadn't taken into consideration that this dude was apparently invincible. Seriously. Unless he dodged and then returned to the same spot just to mess with her, he displayed a level of resilience that shouldn't be possible. And to make matters worse, he rightfully assessed that she didn't have much more in her current playbook. Sure, she could use some other strategies. Still, she was slowly losing blood from the wound on her side, and the last thing she could afford to do in a situation like this was fight with a handicap. I'll admit, that was better than just standing there and getting killed right off the bat, Mangetsu complimented as he approached Tazuna and Sakura at a sedated pace. Maybe you could have actually become someone interesting if you had accepted my offer and stepped to the side when you still had the chance. Sakura glared defiantly. A true shinobi would never take that offer. Mangetsu stopped once he was within arm's reach of Sakura and raised his blade. I guess that's true, he replied with a smirk before swinging the sword down for the girl's head. However, Mangetsu was stopped when a Fuma shuriken made entirely of solid red chakra sword passed his peripheral vision and sliced his arm in two at the elbow. His blade plummeted to the ground with a harsh clang, and Sakura took the opportunity to grab Tazuna and create more distance between them and their foe. Despite being dealt a seemingly horrific blow, Mangetsu didn't seem to react to any pain. In fact, Sakura couldn't even see any blood pouring from his wound. Sorry I'm late, a voice announced from the railing of the bridge to Sakura and Tazuna's right. But a hero is never supposed to show up on time. Sakura could say without a doubt that she'd never been happier to see Naruto in her entire life. It was no exaggeration to say that he had just saved her and Tazuna's lives. If not for the fact that they were currently in a battle scenario, she'd hug him then and there. Hell, even Tazuna looked like he wanted to grab Naruto and squeeze the life out of him. Naruto! Sakura shouted out with glee, making no effort to conceal her relief. Where have you been? Without warning, Naruto vanished with a body flicker before appearing at Sakura's side. He gave her an appraising look and frowned when he saw the wound she'd suffered on her right side. Sakura felt uncomfortable under his scrutinizing gaze and instinctively placed her hand over the wound to conceal it. Unfortunately, this proved a mistake, as she understandably winced in pain. I had to stop by the house and save Inari and Tsunami from some of Gato's thugs, Naruto explained, causing Tazuna to tense up in worry. Before he could even ask, Naruto waved him off. Relax, they're both fine, he assured. They're lucky I arrived when I did, though. Inari was about to get himself killed, charging at Gato's men with a knife to try and save his mother. Tazuna's jaw nearly dropped at the news before being forced to rub his eyes to prevent tears from leaking. His family was safe. Thank God. And while he was less than thrilled that his grandson attempted to fight two grown men alone, he couldn't help but be filled with pride. In the end, the boy proved to be just like his father. So, how much of that did you see? Because I'm not sure we have enough time for me to give you a rundown on this guy, Sakura said. Secretly, she hoped that her teammate had seen her manage to survive and protect Tazuna for as long as she did. Naruto smiled. I caught the back end of your little scuffle, he said before shuddering from a painful memory. You and your damned paper bombs. Their heartwarming moment was interrupted when they were reminded they still had an enemy to face. They looked at Mangetsu and were stunned when the stump of his severed arm began to drip water. Then, inexplicably, the water extended down to his severed arm and connected, eventually reattaching the limb entirely. That would explain how he survived the explosion. Mangetsu then retrieved his sword off the ground as if nothing had happened. Sakura, Naruto spoke, his tone severe and lacking any of its previous bravado. See to that wound and keep an eye on Tazuna. You've done enough. Naruto clearly wasn't waiting to hear what she wanted as he walked toward Mangetsu without even giving her a chance to speak. He probably figured that she would try to argue that she could still help, which was true. But in the end, his decision was probably for the best. In pristine condition, she wouldn't be of much use in a fight like this, and now she was also injured. Nevertheless, she felt a swell of pride build in her chest at Naruto acknowledging her efforts. That's all she'd ever wanted from him. Naruto Uzumaki, Mangetsu greeted as if the circumstances were entirely normal. I'm honored to finally be facing a real challenge. With his hands placed behind his head, Naruto retorted, yeah. Well, the feeling isn't mutual. Mangetsu appeared more amused than disrespected. It was evident that he didn't care what Naruto thought about him, as he was someone who preferred to let his actions do the talking. Still, none of what he said had been lies. He thrived when faced with worthy opponents, and Naruto was definitely a cut above his pink-haired teammate. In fact, in Mangetsu's summation, Naruto was the strongest genin on his team. Have I managed to offend you already? Mangetsu asked, more curious than upset. A pair of chakra kunai appeared in Naruto's hands. He held one conventionally and the other in a reverse grip. You made her bleed, Naruto replied matter-of-factly as if explaining the most straightforward thing ever. So, I'm going to make you bleed. Mangetsu couldn't help but grin. You'd be the first.